Maya Chen stood outside the glass doors of Dragon's Den Jiu-Jitsu Academy, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handles of a worn canvas bag. The afternoon sun blazed through the windows, revealing a bustling world she hadn't been part of for what felt like a lifetime. Through the glass, she could see muscular bodies rolling across blue mats, their movements sharp and precise. The sound of feet sliding across the floor and the occasional thud of bodies hitting the ground made her stomach flutter with nerves. She glanced down at her outfit and immediately regretted her clothing choice. Her oversized library volunteer t-shirt hung loose around her small frame, and the borrowed white pants she'd gotten from her neighbor were at least 2 sizes too big. The belt hung awkwardly around her waist, and she'd had to roll up the pant legs 3 times just so she wouldn't trip over them. Next to the intimidating figures moving with confidence inside, she looked exactly like what everyone would assume she was, a completely out-of-place soccer mom who had wandered into the wrong building. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, Maya pushed open the door. The academy smelled like a mixture of sweat, cleaning supplies, and something else she couldn't quite place. Maybe determination. The walls were covered with tournament photos, championship belts, and motivational posters. In one corner, a group of teenagers practiced takedowns with an intensity that made her question whether she was making a terrible mistake. "Can I help you?" The voice belonged to a friendly-looking man in his 30s, wearing a crisp white G with a black belt around his waist. His name tag read, Coach Rodriguez, head instructor. "Hi, I called about the trial class." Maya's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "I'm Maya Chen. I spoke with someone yesterday about trying a class." Coach Rodriguez's face lit up with a welcoming smile. "Of course. Welcome to Dragon's Den. First time doing jiu-jitsu." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice shaking. It wasn't technically a lie, she told herself. It was her first time at this academy after all. "That's great. Everyone starts somewhere. Let me show you around and introduce you to some of the other students." He gestured toward the main training area where about 20 people were scattered across the mats in various stages of warming up. As they walked onto the mats, Maya felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She knew how she looked, like someone's aunt who had accidentally wandered into a UFC training camp. Her neighbor's GI pants made a soft swishing sound with every step, and she had to keep hitching them up to prevent them from sliding down her hips. "Everyone, we have a new student joining us today," Coach Rodriguez announced. "This is Maya. Let's make her feel welcome." A chorus of friendly hellos echoed across the mat, but Maya could see the quick up and down glances, the barely suppressed smiles, and the way some of the more experienced students exchanged knowing looks. She'd seen that expression before, the same one she got at parent-teacher conferences when other parents assumed she was just another overprotective library worker who couldn't possibly understand their high-achieving children's complex needs. "All right, everyone, let's start with our warm-up," Coach Rodriguez called out. "Maya, just follow along as best you can. Don't worry about keeping up perfectly." The warm-up began with jogging around the perimeter of the mats. Maya fell into line behind a teenage girl who was probably half her age and twice as athletic. Her borrowed pants immediately became a problem, bunching up around her knees and making her gait awkward and unsteady. She had to stop twice to retie the belt that kept coming loose, each pause earning her sympathetic looks from nearby students. Next came jumping jacks, which turned into a minor disaster when the oversized GI top got tangled around her arms. A kind woman with a purple belt helped untangle her, whispering, "Don't worry, we've all been there." Maya smiled gratefully, though she doubted any of these confident athletes had ever looked quite this hopeless. The stretching portion proved equally challenging. While everyone else folded themselves into pretzel-like positions with ease, Maya struggled with basic movements. Her hamstrings, tight from years of sitting behind a library desk, protested loudly when she tried to reach her toes. The teenage girl next to her was practically bending in half, making Maya feel like a rusty robot trying to imitate a gymnast. "Take your time," Coach Rodriguez said, noticing her struggle. "Flexibility comes with practice." During the movement drills, Maya's coordination seemed to abandon her completely. Simple forward rolls became awkward tumbles that left her dizzy and disoriented. When they practiced basic sprawls, dropping to the ground and kicking back into a plank position, her borrowed GI pants nearly betrayed her completely, sliding down despite the belt. "Maybe we should get you some properly fitted gear," suggested a helpful blue belt named Tony, trying to be encouraging. It makes a huge difference. Maya nodded, her face burning with embarrassment. Around her, everyone moved with the fluid grace of people who belonged in this environment. They rolled and twisted and flowed like water, while she moved like a person wearing someone else's clothes and trying to remember how her own body worked. The technical instruction phase began with basic positioning. Coach Rodriguez demonstrated how to sit in someone's guard, the fundamental position where one person lies on their back, with their legs wrapped around their opponent's waist. Maya watched intently, trying to memorize every detail, but when it came time to practice, her movements were stilted and uncertain. It's all about feeling comfortable, Coach Rodriguez explained patiently as Maya awkwardly tried to position herself. Don't think so much. Just move naturally. But nothing about this felt natural to Maya. Every position felt foreign, every movement required conscious thought. She was acutely aware of how her body felt unfamiliar in this space, how different she was from everyone around her. The other students were patient and encouraging, but she could sense their assumption that she was starting from absolute zero. As the class progressed, Maya found herself paired with different partners for various drills. Each pairing reinforced the same narrative. She was the inexperienced newcomer who needed extra patience and simplified explanations. Partners spoke to her slowly, demonstrated movements multiple times, and offered constant reassurance that everyone struggles at first. By the time the technical portion ended, Maya's oversized GI was thoroughly wrinkled and disheveled. Her hair had escaped from its ponytail, and she was breathing harder than she had in months. But despite her outward appearance of struggle, something inside her was awakening, muscle memory that had been sleeping for years, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Coach Rodriguez announced that they would end with some light positional sparring, and Maya felt her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with nervousness. After 8 years away from the mats, she was about to discover if her body remembered what her mind had never forgotten. As Coach Rodriguez began pairing people up for the sparring portion, Maya found herself standing awkwardly to the side, still trying to adjust her oversized G-pants. The other students seemed to naturally gravitate toward partners they knew, leaving her as the obvious odd one out. She watched as purple belts paired with other purple belts, and white belts sought out training partners at their own level. "Hey there, new girl," the voice came from behind her, and Maya turned to see a stocky man in his late 20s approaching with a cocky grin. His purple belt was faded and frayed at the edges, clearly well earned through years of training. Everything about his posture screamed confidence, from the way he rolled his shoulders to the casual way he adjusted his belt. His name patch read Brett, and Maya immediately noticed how other students seemed to give him a wide berth. "I'm Brett," he said, extending his hand with an exaggerated flourish. "Looks like you need a partner, and lucky for you. I'm feeling generous today." His tone had that particular quality that made it sound like he was doing her an enormous favor. Maya shook his hand, immediately noticing how he gripped it just a little too firmly and held it just a little too long. "I'm Maya. Thanks for partnering with me." "No problem at all," Brett said loudly, making sure nearby students could hear. "I always like helping out the beginners. It's good karma, you know. Plus, someone's got to show you the ropes before you get hurt." As they walked to an open section of the mat, Maya became aware that Brett was putting on a bit of a show. He stretched his arms dramatically, cracked his knuckles, and made a big production of retying his belt. Several other students had started watching, drawn by his performance. "So," Brett said as they sat down across from each other, "have you ever done any sports before? Maybe yoga or Pilates? This is going to be pretty different from whatever you're used to." Maya shook her head quietly. "Not really." "That's what I figured," Brett said with a knowing nod. "I can usually tell. You've got that look, you know? Like someone who spends a lot of time behind a desk." He gestured vaguely at her overall appearance. "What do you do for work?" "Let me guess. Office job? Maybe accounting?" "I work at the library," Maya said softly. "A librarian." Brett announced this to the growing audience of onlookers, like he'd just solved a particularly clever riddle. "That explains everything." Quiet, bookish type decides she needs to get in shape and thinks she can handle jiu-jitsu. He chuckled and shook his head. "Trust me, this isn't like checking out books. Things move fast here." Coach Rodriguez called for everyone to start with basic guard position practice. Brett positioned himself between Maya's legs as she lay on her back, and immediately began providing loud commentary. "Okay, so this is called guard?" he explained in the tone someone might use to teach a 5-year-old. "You want to keep your knees close to your chest and try to control my arms. Don't worry if you can't do it right away. This stuff takes years to learn." Maya tried to follow his instructions, but her borrowed GI made everything more difficult. The sleeves were so long that they covered her hands completely, and the baggy material bunched up awkwardly. When she tried to grip Brett's arms, her hands kept slipping off the smooth fabric. "See, this is why proper gear matters," Brett said, loud enough for the other students to hear. "You can't really learn anything when your clothes don't fit. It's like trying to swim in a winter coat." Several nearby students chuckled, and Maya felt her cheeks burning. She tried to adjust her position, but the oversized pants shifted awkwardly beneath her. "Here, let me show you what you should be doing," Brett said, reaching down to move her legs into what he considered the proper position. His hands lingered longer than necessary, and he made sure to explain every adjustment in excruciating detail. "Your legs need to be higher, like this, and your hands should grip here, not there, though I guess with those sleeves it's pretty much impossible anyway." As they continued the drill, Brett's commentary became increasingly condescending. Every mistake Maya made, and the borrowed GI ensured she made many, became an opportunity for him to demonstrate his superior knowledge. No, that's not how you break posture," he said when Maya tried to pull him forward. "You've got to use your whole body, not just your arms, though I guess at your size that's probably not going to work anyway." He flexed slightly as he said this, making sure everyone could see the difference in their builds. "Maybe try using your legs more," suggested Tony, the helpful blue belt from earlier. He was practicing nearby with his own partner, but had clearly been listening to Brett's ongoing lecture. "Yeah, but look at her legs," Brett replied dismissively. "She's got the flexibility of a cardboard box." "No offense," he added quickly, as if that somehow made the comment less insulting. "It's just genetics. Some people are built for athletics and others are built for other things." Maya remained silent, focusing on trying to make the techniques work despite her equipment disadvantages. But she could feel something building inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more focused. "Tell you what," Brett said, sitting back on his heels. "Let's try something easier. Maybe just practice holding the position without trying to do anything fancy. That's probably more your speed anyway." The suggestion drew another round of chuckles from the growing audience. By now, several students had stopped their own practice to watch Brett's teaching clinic with the helpless beginner. "Actually," said a woman with a brown belt who had been practicing nearby, "maybe you should just focus on the basics for now. There's no shame in taking it slow." "Exactly," Brett agreed enthusiastically. "Rome wasn't built in a day, right? And Jiu-Jitsu definitely wasn't built by librarians." He laughed at his own joke, and a few other students joined in. Maya tried a different grip, but her sleeve got caught on Brett's GI, and she had to spend several embarrassing seconds untangling herself. Brett used the opportunity to explain proper grip fighting to their audience, treating Maya like a practice dummy rather than a training partner. "See how she's trying to grab the cloth instead of controlling the arm?" he said, positioning Maya's hands like she was a mannequin. "That's what happens when you don't understand the fundamentals. In Jiu-Jitsu, everything has a purpose. You can't just grab randomly and hope for the best." Coach Rodriguez was working with students across the room, and Maya realized he couldn't hear the increasingly pointed nature of Brett's commentary. What had started as somewhat helpful instruction was becoming more like a public demonstration of incompetence. "You know what your problem is?" Brett said, settling back into position with an exaggerated sigh. "You're thinking too much. This isn't chess, it's combat. You've got to act on instinct." He paused for effect. "Though I guess when your only instinct is to organize books alphabetically, that doesn't really help much." The comment drew the biggest laugh yet from their audience, and Maya felt something shift inside her. 8 years of staying quiet, 8 years of putting everyone else's needs first, 8 years of letting people underestimate her. It was all crystallizing into something sharp and focused. "Maybe we should try a different position," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over Brett's continued commentary about proper technique and realistic expectations. "Sure thing," Brett said magnanimously. "What position do you want to try? Though honestly, we should probably stick to the basics until you get some gear that actually fits." Maya looked directly into his eyes for the first time since they'd started training together. How about guard? We just did guard, Brett said with exaggerated patience. But sure, we can do it again. Repetition is how beginners learn, after all. As Maya lay back down and Brett positioned himself above her, she felt the familiar weight and balance that she remembered so well. Her hands found their grips despite the oversized sleeves, and her legs adjusted to exactly the right angle and pressure. For the first time all evening, Maya smiled. Coach Rodriguez clapped his hands together, drawing everyone's attention away from the various partner drills happening across the mats. All right, everyone, let's finish up with some light positional sparring. Remember, this is about technique, not strength. We're working on flow and timing here. Maya felt her heart rate pick up, but not from nervousness this time. Something deeper was stirring. Muscle memory that had been dormant for years suddenly awakening like a sleeping giant. Light sparring, Brett announced loudly, standing up and stretching his arms above his head with theatrical flair. Perfect timing. This should be interesting. He looked down at Maya with a grin that was equal parts condescending and amused. Don't worry, Maya, I'll go super easy on you. We don't want you getting hurt on your first day. Several students had gathered around to watch, drawn by Brett's ongoing commentary throughout the drilling session. Maya noticed a few higher-ranking belts among the spectators, including a quiet black belt named David who had been training in the corner. Something in his expression suggested he was watching more intently than the others. Actually, Brett said, his voice carrying across the mat, this is perfect for everyone to see what real technique looks like against someone who doesn't know what they're doing yet. He gestured to Maya like she was a visual aid. No offense, Maya, but this is educational for the newer students. Tony, the helpful blue belt, looked uncomfortable. Maybe you should just focus on your own training, Brett. This is training, Brett replied dismissively. Teaching is part of being a higher rank. Plus, Maya needs to understand what she's getting into if she wants to keep coming here. He looked around at the growing audience. Jiu-Jitsu isn't for everyone, you know? Coach Rodriguez was busy helping a struggling white belt across the room and hadn't heard Brett's latest commentary. Maya realized she was essentially on her own for whatever was about to happen. So, Brett said, dropping back down to the mat and positioning himself in Maya's guard, let's start with you trying to do something from here. Anything at all. Just try to move me or off-balance me or whatever you think might work. Maya placed her hands on Brett's arms, and he immediately began providing running commentary for their audience. See how she's gripping my sleeves? He said, not even looking at Maya but addressing the students around them. That's what most beginners do. They think if they just hold on tight enough, something will happen. He easily broke her grips and repositioned himself. But without proper technique, you're just wasting energy. Maya tried to pull him forward, but her oversized GI made it difficult to get the leverage she needed. Brett barely moved. Good try, he said in the tone someone might use to encourage a toddler. But see how I'm controlling my posture? It's all about base and balance. He demonstrated by sitting up straighter and placing his hands on Maya's chest to keep her down. When you know what you're doing, it's pretty easy to shut down someone who doesn't. The audience was growing larger. Even some of the teenage students had stopped their own training to watch Brett's impromptu seminar. Maya could hear whispered comments about poor technique and learning the hard way. Tell you what, Brett said, sitting back on his heels again. Let's make this more interesting. How about you try to submit me? He spread his arms wide in a gesture of mock vulnerability. Go ahead, try any submission you want. I'll give you a full 30 seconds. Several students laughed, and Maya heard someone say, That's not fair, Brett. What's not fair about it? Brett replied innocently. She's got to learn sometime that this stuff takes years to master. Better to understand the reality now than get false hope. He looked down at Maya with exaggerated concern. Unless you think 30 seconds isn't enough time, I can give you a full minute if you want. Maya felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but it wasn't from embarrassment anymore. It was something much more dangerous. The same feeling she used to get right before a competition when an opponent underestimated her. Actually, she said quietly, could we start from a different position? Sure, Brett said enthusiastically. What position do you want? Though honestly, it's not going to make much difference. Technique beats size and experience beats everything. Could we start with me in guard again? Maya asked. But with you actually trying to pass? Brett's eyebrows shot up. You want me to actually try to pass your guard? He looked around at the audience with an expression of amused disbelief. Are you sure about that? Because when I actually try, things happen pretty fast. I'm sure. Maya said softly. Your funeral, Brett said with a shrug. But don't say I didn't warn you. He looked around at the other students. Everyone pay attention here. This is what happens when you try to run before you can walk. As Brett positioned himself in Maya's guard again, David the black belt moved closer to get a better view. Maya noticed his eyes weren't on Brett's positioning. They were watching her legs, her grip placement, the subtle adjustments she was making that no one else seemed to notice. Okay, Brett announced, here we go. I'm going to pass to side control and Maya's going to try to stop me. Watch how proper pressure and technique make all the difference. Brett began his guard pass and immediately Maya could feel the difference in his intensity. This wasn't the playful drilling they'd been doing. He was actually using his strength and skill now, confident that he could easily overwhelm a beginner. See how I'm controlling her hips? He said, still providing commentary even as he worked to pass her guard. That's the key to guard passing. You've got to stop them from moving their hips. But as Brett pressed forward, something unexpected happened. Maya's legs seemed to find exactly the right angles to frame against his shoulders and arms. Her grips, despite the oversized sleeves, settled into positions that felt disturbingly familiar to anyone who knew what to look for. Interesting, she heard David murmur under his breath. Brett felt the resistance and pressed harder, assuming he just needed more pressure to overwhelm her inexperience. Sometimes you've got to use a little more force with beginners, he grunted, pushing forward aggressively. Maya's eyes met his for just a moment, and Brett suddenly noticed something that made him pause. There was no panic in her expression, no confusion or desperation. Instead, there was something that looked almost like calculation. Actually, Maya said, her voice still quiet but somehow carrying more authority than before. Could we reset? I'd like to try something specific. Reset? Brett said, breathing a little harder than he expected. Why? I was about to pass. I know, Maya said simply, but I want to try working from closed guard specifically. Would that be okay? Brett looked around at their audience, most of whom were now watching with genuine interest rather than just waiting for Maya to get embarrassed. He couldn't back down now without looking weak. Fine by me, he said, settling back into position. Closed guard it is. Though I should warn you, this is actually harder for you. At least in open guard you had some mobility. As Maya closed her legs around Brett's waist and adjusted her grip on his GI, David stepped even closer. Other black belts were beginning to notice the change in atmosphere too. Something about Maya's positioning, the way she was breathing, the subtle confidence in her movements. It was starting to trigger recognition in the minds of people who had spent years studying body language and technique. Ready? Brett asked, his hands positioned to start breaking her guard. Maya looked up at him and smiled. Not the nervous, apologetic smile she'd been wearing all evening, but something sharper and far more dangerous. Ready, she said. The word came out with a quiet confidence that made every experienced grappler within earshot suddenly pay very close attention to what was about to happen. The moment Brett settled into Maya's closed guard, the entire atmosphere in the academy shifted. What had been casual entertainment for the watching students suddenly felt different, more focused, more intense. Maya's legs locked around Brett's waist with a precision that made David the black belt take a half step closer. All right, Brett said loudly, placing his hands on Maya's hips in preparation to break her guard open. Let me show everyone the proper way to deal with closed guard. The key is patience and good hand placement. He began applying pressure to open her legs, confident that his strength and experience would make quick work of whatever resistance she might offer. See, most beginners try to squeeze really tight when someone starts to open their guard, he announced to the audience. But that just wastes energy. A good grappler knows how to conserve their strength. Maya remained calm, her breathing steady and controlled. Her oversized gi sleeves had ridden up slightly, and for the first time all evening her hand positioning looked precise rather than clumsy. David noticed it immediately. The way her fingers found the exact right grip on Brett's collar, the subtle angle of her wrists. Here we go, Brett said, applying more pressure to break open Maya's guard. Once I get past these legs, it's over. Side control, mount whatever I want. But as Brett pressed forward, something unexpected happened. Instead of resisting his attempt to open her guard, Maya seemed to flow with his movement, using his forward pressure against him. Her right leg slipped over his shoulder so smoothly that Brett barely realized what was happening. What the? Brett started to say, suddenly feeling off balance. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Maya's left leg swung up and across, trapping Brett's arm against his own neck. Her ankles locked together with a crisp snap that echoed across the suddenly silent mat. Triangle choke. The entire sequence had taken perhaps 3 seconds, and Brett found himself caught in one of the most fundamental yet devastating submissions in jiu-jitsu. His right arm was trapped across his own throat, and Maya's legs formed an unbreakable vice around his neck and shoulder. "Oh my God," someone whispered from the crowd of watchers. Brett's eyes went wide as he realized what had happened. The confident smirk that had been on his face all evening disappeared, replaced by a look of shock and growing panic. He tried to posture up, to create space, to do any of the standard triangle defense techniques he'd learned over his years of training. Nothing worked. Maya's positioning was perfect, not just good, not just technically sound, but absolutely flawless. Her hips were angled precisely to cut off his blood flow. Her legs locked with the kind of pressure that comes from thousands of hours of practice. There was no wasted movement, no unnecessary tension, just pure technique applied with surgical precision. "Tap," David called out urgently from the sideline. "Brett, you need to tap." But Brett was too stunned to respond immediately. His face was already starting to turn red, and Maya could feel his pulse hammering against her leg. In competition, she might have held the position longer, but this was just training. After exactly 14 seconds, she had counted every one. She released the pressure slightly. Brett's hand shot up and slapped against Maya's leg in the universal signal of submission. Tap, tap, tap. Maya immediately released the choke completely, unwrapping her legs and allowing Brett to sit back on his heels. He gasped for air, one hand going to his throat, his face flushed and his eyes still wide with disbelief. The academy had gone completely silent. 20 students stood frozen, watching as Brett tried to process what had just happened to him. The purple belt who had been talking down to Maya all evening had just been submitted in less than 15 seconds by the helpless beginner in the borrowed GI. "Are you okay?" Maya asked quietly, sitting up and adjusting her oversized G-top. Her voice carried none of the nervousness it had held all evening. Instead, there was a calm professionalism that made several of the higher belts exchange knowing glances. Brett nodded slowly, still catching his breath. "Yeah, How did you—" He looked around at the watching faces, then back at Maya. "Where did that come from?" Maya helped him to his feet, and several students noticed how she moved. Not like someone struggling with unfamiliar techniques, but with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in this environment. The borrowed GI that had seemed so awkward on her all evening suddenly looked different, like it was just poorly fitted rather than foreign. "I got lucky," Maya said simply. But there was something in her tone that suggested luck had very little to do with what had just happened. Coach Rodriguez had noticed the sudden silence and was walking over to see what had caused the commotion. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, looking between Brett's still flushed face and Maya's calm expression. "Just a good submission," David said, speaking up for the first time. "Really good technique. From Maya?" Coach Rodriguez asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Perfect triangle," David confirmed, his eyes studying Maya with new interest. "Textbook setup and finish." Brett finally found his voice again. "I don't understand," he said, looking directly at Maya. "You said you'd never done this before. You could barely do the warm-ups. How did you just—" Maya stood up and began retying her belt, which had come loose during the scramble. "I said I'd never trained here before," she said quietly. "And I wasn't really into sports." The distinction hit several of the listening students immediately. Tony, the blue belt, was the first to voice what others were starting to suspect. "Wait," he said slowly. "Have you trained jiu-jitsu before?" Maya looked around at the circle of faces watching her. Some confused, some suspicious, some beginning to show recognition. Brett was still staring at her like she'd just performed magic. "A little," she said with that same calm tone. "It's been a while, though. How long?" David asked, stepping forward. "And where?" Maya smiled, not the nervous, apologetic smile she'd worn all evening, but something warmer and more genuine. "About 8 years since I last competed," she said. "I trained at Gracie Barra before my kids were born." "Competed?" Coach Rodriguez repeated. "What level?" The question hung in the air for a moment as Maya considered how much to reveal. Around her, she could see the pieces clicking into place in the minds of the more experienced students. The awkwardness with the GI, the struggle with basic movements, the apparent lack of conditioning. It had all been real. 8 years away from training would do that to anyone, even someone who had once been elite. But muscle memory, especially for something as fundamental as a triangle choke, never really disappeared. It just waited for the right moment to emerge. I did okay, Maya said modestly. Made it to Worlds a few times. Brett's mouth fell open. Worlds? You mean like the World Championships? Maya nodded, and suddenly her performance made perfect sense to everyone watching. The borrowed GI, the rusty conditioning, the struggles with basic movements, those were all real. But underneath it all was a foundation of technique that had been built over years of elite-level training. What belt were you? David asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Maya looked down at the white belt around her waist, the only belt she owned anymore, since her old ones were packed away in a box somewhere in her closet. Brown, she said simply. I was working toward my black belt when I got pregnant with my first child. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet after the submission. This was the silence of recognition, of understanding, of respect being recalibrated in real time. Brett sat down heavily on the mat, shaking his head in disbelief. You're a brown belt, he said to himself. I just got submitted by a brown belt in 14 seconds. Former brown belt, Maya corrected gently. I'm pretty rusty. David laughed, the first sound anyone had made in almost a minute. Rusty, he repeated. Right. The silence that followed Maya's revelation seemed to stretch on forever. Around the mat, 20 students stood processing what they had just witnessed and learned. The quiet librarian in the borrowed GI wasn't just someone who had gotten lucky with a submission. She was a former, world-class competitor who had stepped away from the sport at the peak of her abilities, coach. Rodriguez was the first to break the silence. Maya Chen, he said slowly, and something in his tone suggested recognition. Wait, Maya Chen from Gracie Barra? You won Pan Am's 3 times, didn't you? Maya nodded, a slight blush creeping up her cheeks. That was a long time ago. Holy crap, one of the teenage students whispered, then immediately looked embarrassed for swearing. Sorry, coach, but seriously? Pan American champion. 3 times, Coach Rodriguez confirmed, his voice filled with something between awe and amusement. And if I remember correctly, you took silver at Worlds twice, lost in the finals both times to absolute legends. Brett was still sitting on the mat, staring up at Maya like she was some kind of mythical creature that had suddenly materialized in front of him. You're Maya Chen, he said flatly. The Maya Chen? I used to watch your matches on YouTube. Maya's blush deepened. You probably watched me lose those finals? Are you kidding? Brett scrambled to his feet, his entire demeanor completely transformed. That armbar sequence you hit at Pan Am's 2015? I must have watched that highlight reel 100 times. You transitioned from guard to mount to armbar so fast the camera could barely keep up. David stepped forward, extending his hand formally. It's an honor, he said simply. I saw you compete at Worlds in 2016. You should have won that final. That referee call was terrible. Maya shook his hand, surprised by the warmth in his voice. Thank you. That means a lot. Wait, Tony said, his voice rising with excitement. So when you were struggling with the warm-ups and couldn't figure out the basic positions, that was all real, Maya said quickly. 8 years away from training is 8 years. My cardio is shot, my flexibility is gone, and I honestly forgot half the basic movements. Everything you saw during class was genuine struggle. But the triangle? Brett started. Some things you never forget, Maya said with a small smile. Especially when someone gives you the perfect setup. Brett's face went through several different expressions as he processed this information. Oh God, he said finally. I spent the entire class talking down to you like you were some clueless beginner. I told you Jiu-Jitsu wasn't built by librarians. I said you should try yoga instead. He put his face in his hands. I'm such an idiot, you didn't know, Maya said gently. And honestly, I probably would have made the same assumptions. I know how I looked out there. That doesn't make it okay, Brett said, looking up at her with genuine remorse. I was being a complete jerk. I turned your first day back into a show for everyone else. That was wrong, regardless of who you are. Coach Rodriguez nodded approvingly at Brett's words. That's exactly right. Respect on the mats isn't about belt level or competition records. It's about treating every training partner with dignity. I'm sorry, Brett said directly to Maya. Really sorry. I was showing off and being condescending, and you didn't deserve that. Nobody would deserve that. Maya studied his face for a moment, seeing genuine regret rather than just embarrassment at being caught. Apology accepted, she said. But I have a condition. Brett looked nervous. What's that? Next time we roll, you don't go easy on me because I'm a woman, or because I used to compete, or for any other reason. I want you to train hard and help me get back in shape, deal? Brett's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. Deal. Though I should probably learn some triangle defense first. The comment drew laughter from the assembled students, breaking the last of the tension that had filled the air. Maya found herself laughing too and realized how good it felt to be around this energy again. So, Coach Rodriguez said, clapping his hands together, I think we can consider your trial class a success. Would you like to sign up for a membership? Actually, Maya said, I should probably get some GI that actually fits first. These belong to my neighbor, and I think I've put them through enough trauma for one day. We can help with that, David offered. There's a gear shop next door, and they know how to size women's GIs properly. And Maya, Coach Rodriguez added, if you're interested, we could really use someone with your experience helping with our women's classes. A lot of our female students struggle with confidence, especially when they're starting out. Having someone like you as a role model could make a huge difference. Maya felt something warm spreading through her chest. I'd like that. Though I should warn you, I'm going to need to work my way back up to teaching level. 8 years is a long time. Judging by that triangle, you're closer than you think, David said with a grin. As the formal class ended and students began to drift away, several people approached Maya to introduce themselves properly and ask questions about her competition days. She found herself surrounded by eager faces wanting to know about training methods, mental preparation, and what it was like to compete at the highest levels. Brett lingered until the crowd had thinned out, then approached her again. Maya, I know I already apologized, but I want you to know something else. The way you handled tonight, staying calm when I was being awful, not embarrassing me more than I deserved, accepting my apology, that shows real class. You could have made me look like a complete fool in front of everyone. You're a good training partner when you're not trying to prove something, Maya said. I could tell from the way you move. I'm looking forward to rolling with you again. Just promise me one thing, Brett asked. What's that? Next time, maybe give me a little warning before you hit me with world-class technique? My ego is still recovering, Maya laughed. I'll try to remember that. Though in my defense, you did ask me to submit you. Fair point, Brett said, shaking his head ruefully. Note to self, be careful what you ask for. As Maya gathered her borrowed gear and prepared to leave, Coach Rodriguez pulled her aside. I meant what I said about helping with classes. But I also want you to know, this is your gym now if you want it to be. What happened tonight? That's exactly the kind of energy we try to build here. Respect, growth, learning from mistakes. Maya looked around the academy, at the mats where she'd just rediscovered a part of herself she thought was gone forever, at the students who had welcomed her despite her rusty performance, at the photos on the wall showing the dreams and achievements of people who had found their passion here. I think I'd like that very much, she said as she walked toward the door. Maya heard Brett call out behind her. Hey Maya, same time next week? She turned back with a grin. Wouldn't miss it. But Brett, yeah? I'm buying a GE that fits. So you might want